Welcome to a special edition of the Late Late Supply Chain Show with your host, Bill Dubois. Our moderator will be Roddy Martin, and special guests include, from Business First, Rob Reinckens, and from First Solar, Shellie Molina, and from Kinaxis, Trevor Miles.
Check. Oh, you're too kind. You're too kind. Well, welcome to the Late Late Supply Chain Show. And how many people here, it's their first time to Palm Springs or the Palm Desert area? A few here. So next year, they're actually going to have this conference on the sun because it's just as hot and it's easier to get to. So I had a really hard time getting here, and I've realized why I can't stand airport travel and everything that goes with that. I don't know if you agree with me. The one thing that I found out that really bothers me are people who stand on the moving walkway. They don't know that that moving walkway is to get to your gate faster, not to have a rest between connections. And there are three personalities. There's the military type. He just stands there and he said, "General, the moving walkway is secured and you're not getting by that guy." There's the bungee jump crowd, and they just have that look of fear. They're the ones that want the safety harness and slow the speed down to 5 feet a minute. There's that crowd. You can get around them. And then there's the beach crowd. They look like they're just going to crack open a beer and all this going on while I'm missing my flight to Palm Springs. So the other thing that really bothers me is airport security. I am not a friend of airport security. Have you seen these devices? Have anybody had to go through these? Yeah, I can't. And what really bothers me is it's just the gall. They just think they've got that power. In fact, they've come up with the airport security calendar. Here's Miss January. I don't like. They're not friends. So, we're happy. This is our second year at the Gartner event for the Late Late Supply Chain Show. And last year they introduced the Magic Quadrant for the Late Show. I'm happy to. I don't know why they didn't present this last night at the Top 25 dinner, but I'm happy to say that we are still the leaders in the space. Some people called Oprah a quitter. She's still hanging in there, but we're really proud that we're the leaders in this quadrant. So thanks to you folks for voting for us. We've got a great show. We've got some really good guests. How many people here know Roddy Martin? Yeah, a lot of people. So some of you came to me and said, I understand you've got Roddy on stage. How are you going to keep him awake for an hour? And so I said, what we decided to do is we're going to actually make Roddy the official Late Late Supply Chain host. So I'm actually going to be the Ed McMahon of supply chain. So we're really happy that Roddy has agreed. You know him all from AMR, but we're really happy he agreed to take the desk and really run the show. We're going to talk a lot about Control Tower. That's the theme of our session today. I know you're going to get a lot out of it, so let's get this show going. Please welcome to the stage Roddy Martin.
I got one. Okay. I got one.
Okay, this is how it works. Now you sit down.
Yep, I'll sit down.
And
not fall asleep. So you're going to kick me?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about is just to position a few perspectives on supply chain. And then I'm going to bring up the panel members who are Kinaxis users and also Kinaxis specialists. And we'll talk about the control tower. The whole purpose of this discussion is really to differentiate and get everybody to understand what a control tower is and why it's an essential ingredient of today's supply chain. So a couple of important points. First is what's changed in supply chain is that supply chain is end-to-end, and it starts at the customer. So those of you who have been in the various consumer presentations over the last couple of days, it's a really important principle of the Dells, the Procter & Gamble's, the Unilevers. It's all about customer-driven, and it in fact starts at the shelf. So manufacturing and products are all part of today's supply chain definition, and that creates the kinds of complexity that we need to manage really carefully with the control tower because it gives us that 360 visibility. This is the challenge. How do we bring all these pieces together? We've put billions of dollars worth of IT enterprise applications into the business. And the problem that supply chain leaders will tell you is we keep on having to change out our systems as the business progresses. So some of you who obviously have worked with AMR and research and Gartner over the years will recognize this model. Really the three key pieces of the supply chain going from left to right are the demand visibility, the red piece in the center, which is sales and operations planning, integrated business planning, and then on the right-hand side, the product supply piece. Now you can imagine there are a lot of systems that live behind all of these pieces. And I go back to the point that I've just made, and it's very frustrating for business leadership today who are being constrained in moving the business forward in its end-to-end process capabilities because of the system's complexities. Now, just before I get the panel up, I want to talk the context of maturity and companies, how they rate in terms of their performance improvement maturity along a 5-stage scale. Very quickly, those 5 stages are: I react to problems. Stage 2 is I build projects around problems to improve and build the supply chain. 3 is I integrate functions. 4, I operate as an end-to-end supply chain. And 5, a value network. And just to give you an idea, I've benchmarked 40 companies. The industry average is 2.4, so most companies are still building supply chains and improving as a set of projects. P&G are 4.7, Unilever 4.2. And it's very interesting that if you look at those companies and the opportunity for the control tower, it starts to become quite a significant performance opportunity. This is what we're driving for, and you probably recognize this from a very similar slide Gary Hamill put up, and that is the good companies actually look at results and practices. So if you're all practice and no performance, it's a bureaucracy. If you're all performance and no practice, it's not sustainable. And what we're really trying to do is get up there where the Procter & Gamble's and some of the other leaders in the space that you saw in last night's top 25, which is you do practices to improve performance in the business. And so the opportunity that we're going to start exploring with the control tower is, does the control tower give us that opportunity to drive that practice performance relationship without the complexities of the lower transaction systems? So finally, this is the 4 levels of systems that all businesses have. Down at the lowest level, real-time systems. Next level up is the transaction systems of record. Then we have systems of process, the business process management systems. But then we have a line and we have the way the business actually operates. Now the problem is the business is progressing along those stages of process maturity and keeps on having to change out in the IT environment, the applications environment. So the big opportunity here is to actually put the control tower in between the way the business actually operates and the lower infrastructure-based systems. So that as we move those process capabilities to operating as an end-to-end demand-driven supply chain, we're using that control tower to contextualize the information coming up from the transaction layer and using it in the way the business operates. So without further ado...
Actually, before you do that, I did want everybody to know there will be time for questions after, so if you have those, think about that. And Roddy, I almost forgot. Here's your water. So there you go.
Okay. So I'm going to ask each of the panel members to come up, and while they're coming up on stage, what I've asked them to do is each of them are going to introduce their role themselves, and then they're going to give the audience a key point. And the key point is around control towers, and obviously a couple of them are Kinaxis users, control tower users. But I think the key point is the takeaway, and then we're going to start asking some questions and exploring this concept of the control tower. So Bob, let's start with you.
Sure thing. I'm Bob Reinckens. Was a CIO for 11 years for a $4 billion consumer products company where I implemented Kinaxis for our supply chain solution. But the key takeaways, words for me in terms of the control tower are flexibility, scalability, and most importantly, actionability. If I look at the existing, what I'll call the Ferrari transactional systems that we put in place, we've modified those to run on a dirt track. So we've taken a very powerful race engine, race car. We've changed the suspension. We've changed out the tires. We've changed out the gear ratios, and we're running that on that dirt track. And in racing, there's multiple types of tracks. So every time we go to a different track, we have to make different changes. And if you look at that in terms of your supply chain solutions, it's akin to out comes the Excel duct tape. And for each track, you've got a different color of duct tape that goes on. So you're modifying that Ferrari-based transactional system every time there's a change in your supply chain.
So that's what you want, flexibility to be able to evolve with the process maturity, but still not hold the business back in its capability.
Absolutely.
Great point.
Shellie Molina with First Solar, Vice President of Supply Chain. So for me, the takeaway is intelligent speed. Not to be confused with slow and stupid, but faster is better. The other thing is to be able to say that you want to be able to move fast, but you want to be able to answer the question or avoid the question of, I didn't know. Many times you move fast, you make decisions, and then you find out the consequences later, and the response from the team is, well, I didn't know that was what was going to happen. So that's a key takeaway for me.
And for me, the important point there is effective and actionable speed. So this is not just about visibility. This is
Correct.
about process context, data in that process context, and actually enabling the business to make better decisions.
Exactly.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Trevor.
Trevor Miles, VP Thought Leadership at Kinaxis, and you're just taking my key point away from me already. No, but in truth, the key thing is that visibility. But visibility is only the start, and this is in fact something somebody tweeted from the Caterpillar session earlier, that visibility only tells you what the situation is, but it doesn't tell you anything about the impact of what that is going to have on the rest of the organization. But equally important, supply chain is a team sport, or it should be. We've functionalized it into demand planning and supply planning and procurement and all of this sort of stuff. But let's face it, when we're looking at what the customer requires, the demand-driven, that should be driving everybody's actions throughout the supply chain. So without the ability to connect the dots up and down the supply chain, so that when you have some event that becomes visible, without the ability to translate that into what that means in terms of impact, financial and operational, and then identify who is impacted, who's that person that needs to know of that impact, and then bring everybody together to work on the intelligent response, profitable response, doing that quickly. That is what a control tower should always be about.
And we're going to go back and explore that next.
Well, my name's Bill Dubois. I do have a real job, and I'm fortunate enough to actually show people what this control tower thing looks like. And my perspective on it would be, could you imagine going to the airport and seeing 2 or 3 or 4 different control towers, and maybe one control tower is responsible for landings and another one responsible for takeoffs, and I think that Shelley's point about the speed, if you have to go somewhere else for somebody to participate or to get information, that's just going to introduce lag time. So it's all about providing one place for all users to understand the impact and respond in the business.
So that's a great point to pick up on, because the idea, we heard DuPont in the last presentation talk about hundreds of supply chains. We can't have hundreds of control towers around the business. We also can't have a control tower that's all functionally divided and we can't see over the walls. The whole idea here is we've got to be able to make decisions in the business effectively with all this transaction data that exists. So the question is, what is a control tower? What is it not? And let's start with you, Trevor. And what are the building blocks of a control tower?
So without a doubt, everybody needs to operate with an ERP system, a transaction system, where you're taking your orders, where you're keeping your bills of material, etc. There's no doubt about it that many people have spent a lot of money in putting planning systems above that. But really, if you look about those planning systems, they've been developed to support functional requirements, functional processes, demand planning, capacity planning, inventory optimization, things like that. But very few of them look across the functions. But if you're going to have a control tower, as Bill said, an airport with 4 different control towers would just not make sense. So why do we have these systems and really processes that are supported by systems that divide the supply chain up into different sections? Because the key thing about information, A guy I love reading about is George Stork, who talked about competing against time. And process, so much of our time is tied up in process. So being able to take that atomic information, the change in demand, the drop in order, the ASN that didn't arrive, the quality that wasn't realized, and be able to blow that out in a very short period of time to understand what the consequence is. That is such a key aspect of this control tower. So it's this visibility, yes, but it's a visibility to consequence, not to events. It's not about knowing where the inventory is, it's knowing how you're going to use that inventory. And if you've got too little, who's going to be impacted? That's
so Bob is an ex-CIO. I mean, we've seen CIOs chasing, single instances and master data for years and years and years. Does this make that a little easier? Because when you look at companies that are really up in the top 5 of the top 25, they're about information management to support the end-to-end supply chain. They're not, they don't get hung up on whether it's vendor A or vendor B or vendor C, which makes this information layer, this control tower layer, really critically important. And does it make IT's life a lot easier?
Oh, it certainly does. It creates that information hub where you're bringing in all the across the whole supply chain. You now have the ability to bring in all the information, all the data that can impact your business. From a CIO perspective, it was probably the easiest implementation that I'd done, because the users really ran with this from the start. It was not led by IT. It was led by the user community, but it gave them that view of the data very quickly. And one of the key benefits for us, because we're a consumer products company, is that the demands coming from the retailer, data coming in from the consumer, the change in terms of the product that we had to put on the shelf, and when to deliver that. So for us to react to that, if you use a traditional MRP system, you can't run that simulation. It's great at processing transactions, but if I want to make it, if I want to take a look at the impact of a decision or a change that we want to make in a forecast, in an order going out to one of our major customers, for instance being Walmart, we want to do that in real time. So we want to understand our ability to deliver. We also want to understand the cost of the business. So what is the impact in terms of our margins? So from a CIO perspective, having that capability sitting above a very robust transactional system gave us a key competitive advantage.
What fascinated me about your story was the fact that the decision to buy really came from the business and it wasn't an IT decision. And some of the success stories that you quoted are useful. Would you tell some of those stories?
Sure. So I have been a Kinaxis user for about 15 years. So coming to First Solar, I kind of felt like when we were looking at the tool we were using, we had a lot of rework that was being done. So when they produced information, another team had to hand manage it, and it really wasn't giving us the answer we needed. So I basically said, this is going to be a tool that we're going to use. So I implemented it in the finished goods planning portion of it. So we take our unconstrained forecast, or our unconstrained forecast from our CRM system, and it loads directly into the tool, and then our team goes and does the finished goods planning with it to create a supply plan. But really the big concern was with our CIO and some concerns around wanting to be in one single tool. But when I met with the CFO and said that I would be committing to reducing our inventory by 10%, certainly got a lot of attention. So we were able to secure the tool and move forward quickly.
How difficult, when we think about the days of implementing MRPs and ERPs, CEO stood up and did the good thing, I support the project, and
right.
IT gets on with it. How did the business actively support the capabilities that you put in place? Because this is a fundamentally different scenario.
Absolutely. Well, your point about the business team, we wrote the statement of work, and we were the ones that worked with the consultants. We had it done in about 10 weeks. So, we were implementing it and using it within 10 weeks, which was a pretty phenomenal event for our company.
Trevor, what isn't a control tower? Any specific misconceptions that you think people may have that we can correct?
Well, there are some, Roddy. Clearly the term has been around for some time, but it's been focused very much on visibility. And without a doubt, let me say that, visibility is a really good place to start. But you heard what Shellie and Bob were saying, right? What it's not is that action of taking an order, right? That's not a control tower. But it's in that what it is that process of making a decision on what you're going to do that's going to affect your future business. So everybody needs that transactional level to actually take the order, to actually issue purchase orders, to actually pay the customer, pay the supplier, not the customer, take the money from the supplier, from the customer. That is, but that's not control tower, right? The other thing is that, yes, even our customers, Shellie will attest to this, is, no one starts with a big bang and you immediately go to an end-to-end layer that goes across the entire supply chain. But the whole point of a control tower is to get to that end-to-end perspective. But you can't do it by supporting individual stovepipes and then just connecting a thin layer at the top.
See, I think that's the power for me. I mean, the reality is, if you look at the DuPonts and the Procter & Gamble's who are on this journey of process excellence from project-based improvement to end-to-end value networks, the reality is that we can't take a stage 5 design transaction system and put it onto a project organization and expect it not to be customized. Yeah. However, if we have this flexible, adaptable layer in the control tower, we can actually evolve our process capabilities as we get better at practices and we drive performance. And so it supports the journey rather than having to keep on re-implementing systems. And I think that's a really important aspect. Paul, anything that you'd add to that?
Yeah, I was having a conversation with somebody at the booth, and they said we're data rich, but we're information poor. And I think to Trevor's point, you start getting that. People have done work to get data into one place, but then it's what do you do with it? And a lot of times there's hundreds of people, thousands of people that need that information. So it's just not about getting that data in one place, but being able to plan, monitor, and respond in that one place.
Yep. Good. So I'm going to ask the audience to start getting ready with some questions, because we'll have time for 2 or 3 questions. And I don't know if we have a roving microphone. Do we, Bill?
I got it right here.
Okay. So if you have a question, stick your hand up and we'll get to you. Let's ask, what do you have to really be careful of in deploying a control tower? Because I would imagine there are some clear functionalities that a control tower isn't. It's not a replacement of your transaction system. It maybe is vertically dependent on if you're going to do planning, because there's complexities in some verticals that may be different. But what do you have to be careful? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is this doesn't mean we can just stick all the transaction systems on the back burner and not worry about master data. Can we talk a little bit about master data, both of you, from a real-world point of view?
From a real-world point of view, in your transactional system, your ERP apps, you're still maintaining your bills of materials. You're maintaining all of your SKU information is there, and that's being brought up into the control tower, because that data, you want one single source for that information, one single source of the truth. You want your master data about customer, you want master data about your products, your bills of material residing in one place, because the control tower is going to use that data to create a view of the business, while your transactional system will use that to generate the purchase orders, to drive the front end of your supply chain, but it's also going to drive the actual build portion of it, feeding it into your plant. So I think it's important that you continue to maintain and control that information in one source.
In the infrastructure.
In the infrastructure itself.
So what we're really saying is, look, all the efforts that you've had in master data and managing infrastructure don't go away, but we actually go up to a new standards architecture, because now it's more important to have process context as a standard up in the control layer. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, and I think that the thing that I would take from that is that you still have your master data within your ERP system, but you're also going to have master data or master information in this particular tool. So you may have particular tables of, in my case, maybe logistics costs that I don't necessarily have that in my ERP system, but I have it in a table that I want to keep maintained, because that's going to be information to me on how I'm going to make decisions in terms of how the whole thing rolls together. So that's important. But you don't get away from an administrator. You're still going to have someone. The difference for me, and that makes it easier for me, is that when I want to do something, it's someone who works in the supply chain, and we're designing it. I don't necessarily have to reach out to my IT partner or ask for them to put a project team together to provide me information. That's a really big asset for me.
So is that a new set of skills in the supply chain organization? Because we're talking about architecture, but a process mapping, maybe some value stream mapping. Was that something the supply chain team has been able to pick up quite easily?
You know, my supply chain team has picked it up extremely. They have been so excited. I had one of my guys tell me that they had a crush on it. So the thing of it is that it is so easy to use. Basically, if you know how to do anything in Excel, then you can program it to do whatever you want. And so, you know, when you have a problem that you need solved, you're not going to MIS or IT to have it solved. You're going to your own team. And they have the business knowledge of where everything is. So it kind of cuts out some cycle time in terms of solving those problems as well.
We need to find that guy a date, I think. Then.
Yeah.
Just the one thing I heard, Shellie, maybe that the people that tend to gravitate to that role are the folks, you probably already have these folks in your organization, but the people that are the Excel and the Access database experts.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So Trevor, one quick question, and then it feels like there's a question at the back there. But in terms of where the product's going, so where does the control tower go from here? Obviously, it's at a level of capabilities. What's the vision for the product over the next couple of years? What can we expect to see?
Mobility is a big one, right? Because I'd like to bring that description of mobility into a lot of what Bob and Shellie were talking about. If I just start with Shellie there quickly, you know, what is it that the CEO typically asks, or the CFO? You walk into the office, and however they word the question, it's essentially, what if? So if you now have to go through the process of going to IT and getting a statement of work and then schedule in the resources and all of this type of thing, and 6 months later, the CFO has forgotten about that what-if scenario, but the business is still suffering the consequences of having not been able to answer it. So a key thing, I think, in terms of capabilities that we're going to have to see is that that ability to walk into the CEO's office or CX's office with a tablet and be able to say, well, what if we actually sourced from a different location? What if we actually used a different mode of transportation? And I'm not talking about for this order. I'm talking about in 6 months' time, in 9 months' time, if you're talking at the CXO level. Well, certainly maybe down in a particular case that went golfing last weekend with a really important customer, and they've come in and they said, you have to get that order in. In both situations, you need to be able to analyze that information very quickly with a what-if scenario, change anything within the supply chain that is within your control, and be able to say, what is the financial impact, what's the operational impact, who else is going to be impacted, who else needs to authorize. All of those questions have to be answered very quickly, because if you can't answer them quickly, that's just process waste. That's just process waste. So just quickly, so the mobility is a big thing because it's all about bringing that information to the executive suite. That's the key thing. I've heard a lot of the talking within the corridors, within sessions, about how supply chain is getting to the executive suite. Well, we've got to give them the tools to get there. Okay?
So I'm a supply chain leader, chief supply chain officer, and I'm bringing 4 major segments of my business together. And this seems like a step I can take to give the business some process functionality quite quickly. Is there a process that I think gravitates towards the use of the control tower as a first step? I mean, my gut feeling says planning is probably planning and collaboration is probably one of the first processes I can use to take some complexity out of the business. Any comments on that, both from your point of view?
Oh, absolutely. Across the 16,000 SKUs that we had, which is variations of our finished goods going out to the retailers. It simplified the planning process for the team. And what it did is it gave them the capability to build on what Trevor said, is you're getting into a meeting with VP of Sales, VP of Marketing, the divisional president, and they want to see, well, what's the impact of making this change to our SKUs or reallocating to another retailer because the demand is there. They could do that very, very quickly, create that scenario with the planning team right there. So it was a major benefit to the business in terms of how we could respond to our customers.
Anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say from a prior life, there were a particular division that I worked in had about 14 different sites, all on legacy systems. So they weren't on a single instance of an ERP, and all very different from an acquisition type of base. And they were able to put all of that data into one location. So when they were running their sales and operations planning meeting on a weekly basis, all of the demand was in one particular place, so that one salesperson who was dealing with that one particular customer, whereas prior, let's also say, we had 5 different people that were representing our company going to that customer, right? So now you have, from a products level, going from products level to just a customer-focused level. So now this one person is able to be responsible for an account for 14 different sites, whereas prior it was 14 different people. So having that ability for it to be in one location and then to see how the supply would match to it. And then it is about the fact that the order information is in the tool itself, so you're able to see how do you want to allocate, and if that particular salesperson is going to that particular account, they're able to see everything with them. I think, and we've heard this through the last couple of days, my title also includes customer service. And so for me, that is really, really important for me to understand all of the impacts that I'm going to have based on decisions that we may make. And last year at this time, when you're dealing with allocations of products and having to pick which customer you're going to ship something to, because you just can't make enough, is a whole nother piece of data when you're talking to the CEO, right? I mean, it would have been wonderful for our CFO to have had a tablet with him and be able to go to that customer and say, here's the decisions that we're making and why we made those decisions.
I see this visual of a control tower, and the S&OP meetings happens at the base of the control tower. Anyway, are there any questions out there? If you want to just raise your hand, we can get a microphone.
I'm about to give my mic up. I didn't realize how difficult. I usually don't have to say anything intelligent. It's a lot easier sitting over there. But I'm going to give that pressure up. So here's the microphone for questions.
Any questions from the audience?
While we're waiting for questions for the audience, I also want to point out, we've talked, this conversation has been a lot around more traditional types of things. In our business, we do projects. So it's about project management. So when you were talking about projects and process improvement projects, in my world, I've got to deal with 20, 30 different projects that I'm dealing with. And they all use the same material. And based on those projects, having the control tower allows us to decide how we're going to prioritize to projects. And that is a really big deal. And that's something that I think is one of the new things that the control tower brings. Like I said, using it in my prior life, very traditional manufacturing, very traditional type of event. I'm very excited to be able to use it in this new application. Because that's probably where the decisions and that speed that I talked about is the most relevant, because we are making decisions very quickly. We're just potentially not making intelligent speed decisions, and we're costing a lot more. So we have some particular leader saying, hey, we're going to save $1 million if we're able to speed this project up. But I need to be able to respond back and say, but that's going to cost us $2 million in this project world that you're just looking at your cost project to project, and so they don't see the full picture.
And that's why I used the S&OP perspective, because if the companies that are really good at S&OP, effectively they're looking at demand, they're looking at constrained supply, and they're saying what trade-offs do we need to make.
Right.
So that becomes integrated business planning. The control tower is the most logical place to do all of that. And
Exactly.
it probably starts to gel the concept of integrated business
and
planning.
then it lets you, I mean, a lot of the concepts of S&OP or business planning, you know, the big deal is that shouldn't be a weekly meeting or a monthly meeting. It's every day.
Continuous.
It's every day.
Right.
And that's one of the big challenges that I had in terms of training my folks, is they were kind of used to this, we're going to have a monthly S&OP meeting. No, we're going to have a daily S&OP meeting. But most of the reason that they're driven to a monthly S&OP meeting was because of information's not available. And it takes you that long to add it all up and get it all together, and you shouldn't have to do
squirt
that.
it from one system to another
Exactly.
and analyze it differently and have a different perspective, and you've got 3 different spreadsheets and 4 different systems, bringing it all together. I think bringing those processes, you know, and it depends on the industry. If, you know, the traditional S&OP process of doing a demand plan, then a supply plan, then a demand-supply balance, and an executive S&OP. Well, that's great if you're in a slow-moving industry that has a fairly repetitive product stream. But if you're in a rapidly changing product environment, you've got to have new product introduction there. If you've got new product introduction, you better have procurement there. You better have engineering. You better have marketing. All of these functions need to be brought together, and that's why the control tower, the visibility of multiple functions across the organization is really important. But the what if, I want to just stress the what if a little bit there. So, because our tendency in supply chain is to talk about plan, plan, plan. But we all know, and I've heard multiple people, I heard the guy from P&G who said, we all know how accurate the forecast is, right? Wink, wink. And many other people have said the same thing, right? So what does the forecast drive? The forecast drives our supply plan. So if our forecast is wrong, our supply plan must be to some extent wrong, okay? So we all need to plan. But what we are missing, and what I think the control tower provides, is that ability to understand what actually is happening in the marketplace, what's actually happening in the supply base. And that's when you start connecting the pieces together, that connective tissue of when somebody changes their mind, of understanding what the supply impact is. Not tomorrow, not next week, today, right now.
See, and that's why I used the context of trade-offs. I mean, when you get to stage 3, stage 4 process maturity, it's no longer just about supply and demand balancing.
No.
You're now making decisions on, do I really want to do this order? Do I have capacity to do it? Can I simulate what's going to happen to my materials? Is this going to turn out to be profitable?
Exactly.
So now you have a home to do all of that.
Yes.
Whereas before we didn't really have a home because it was really complex to do that in the transaction layer. We didn't really have an information management architecture that decoupled the business and the way it works from the transaction layer.
Absolutely.
So let's ask, I know there was a sign of a question.
Yeah, this is Randy Peterson with World Kitchen, and that last conversation did touch some upon my question, but I'll ask it anyways. If you're a company that currently has an ERP system and currently has a business intelligence system installed, how do you justify buying another third piece of software like Kinaxis to implement a control tower application environment?
Well, I can take that one. Just as a bit of levity, you could always use your maintenance contract that you're paying for your business intelligence system and apply that to us. But that was meant as levity. The key point here is a business intelligence system, the ones I'm familiar with, the ones that I've used. I'm sure, you know, I don't want to say negative things about people out there who sell these things. But let's face it, what you've mostly got in your business intelligence system is what has happened, what is past. It's not about how are you going to guide your business into the future. What is going to be likely to be your future business performance if you continue to operate in the manner that you are. So a control tower is a lot more than visibility. And I admit that a business intelligence tool will often give you that level of visibility by bringing data in from multiple systems. But it doesn't give you that actionable insight. It doesn't have a bill of material to say that if this item is short, which is the final finished order that's going to, or finished goods that's going to be late. If a new order comes in, a business intelligence tool cannot tell you which components are short. So that's really, it's about bringing that together.
I'd love to pick on the point you make about variability. I mean, my answer to you would be, if you say that you can run your business without any variability on an ERP system, then I guess the case is questionable, but that's not reality, and you make that point.
Yeah, and I guess I would say that one of the biggest differences is that in a closed loop system, right, so in utilizing the Kinaxis tool, it's closed loop, so it can talk back to your ERP system. I've not seen a BI product that's able to do that I've been exposed to, and that's probably one of the benefits that my buyers have, is that when they get, they talk with the supply base, they can make the changes, and then it'll talk back to the system, so the transaction's closed loop. So that's the biggest. That's one of the biggest benefits from my team's perspective. When you're updating, 300, 400, 500, purchase orders. That's a big deal. The other piece is that it comes with a supplier portal, so you don't pay anything extra for that. So by utilizing that, the suppliers have access to it, and so the other thing that we need to kind of talk through is that you can have your customers look at it and your suppliers. So the collaboration is not just within the four walls of the organization, right? The collaboration goes from end to end, which is really one of the big things. So that whole closed loop piece is really important. I tend to think of BI being a little more static. So one of the things is if someone makes a transaction and has just booked an order at noon today, at 2 o'clock when I'm running a simulation on a what if, that order's in there. So I can see that visibility, and I now know the what ifs. And Trevor's right. We get what ifs all day long. There isn't a day that goes by that our planning team doesn't get asked on different projects. What's moving in? Somebody wants to expedite whatever. But the what if is probably it's extremely important. And I'll go back to the control tower piece of the airlines, right? So you have a plan. I mean, they started their day with a plan in terms of how planes were going to land, right? They had that plan, but then they had to adjust. And that's really what the power for me is in my organization and in my prior life was, how do I adjust to the plan? That's part of it.
And I think that I've put the slide up that I showed earlier, where you have, it's not just about ERP. There's product lifecycle management systems, there's procurement systems, there's manufacturing, there is sourcing and procurement up at the process level. So it's much more than just the ERP system. And I don't think you are buying it just to complement ERP. You're actually buying it to complement the end-to-end processes of the supply chain.
Yeah, in our world, we use it to run our supply chain. So it is our operating system for the supply chain.
I think the other thing, too, to think about in terms of BI, you're creating a snapshot, a picture of your business. You're building it, bringing that data into your data warehouse, and you're taking a snapshot on it. And to make any changes to that, to create another view of the business, you've got to bring the IT team in to do that. And at times, that may require a longer lead time than you have to actually get the actionable information that you need to make the business decision. So I think as everybody, we've talked about is the Kinaxis model in terms of the control tower, it's built around supply chain. So it allows the users, the planners, the supply chain people to create those scenarios, create those different views of the data because it's designed around supply chain.
Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Any other questions? There we go.
My first question is about the number of control towers. You mentioned that it doesn't make sense to have 4 control towers in an airport. The thing is, if a company has multiple supply chains, say for example, the supply chain officer responsible for a region or a product line that doesn't really have a lot of interactions with the other production lines, and does that make sense to still have one control tower, or you can have multiple supply chains modeled within one supply chain control tower?
I think it all depends on how the organization is structured. So it's not a question about having a monolithic view. Please don't take the control tower aspect to mean that you've got this great all-seeing organization that doesn't allow any local variability. What you're really doing is providing that connected tissue to your organization so that you do understand how these supply chains interact. Because undoubtedly, you might have a business unit that's fairly autonomous, but they are probably using or buying materials from very similar suppliers as another business unit is doing. So at least you need to bring that information together. But very frequently, even though you might have different supply chains, they're using the same capacity. They might be using the same warehouse. They might be using the same transportation lanes. So there's still places where these supply chains abut. So the important point here is not that people out in the field lose control. In fact, in a control tower, they should have a lot more control. Gary Hamel was talking about that. The idea that you can buy a $20,000 car on your own, make that decision, but somehow when you get into work you can't make a $200 decision. Well, our view is you've got to be able to make that $20,000 decision at the point where it matters, out in the field. But the key is that as long as you've got all of that information connected up into the control tower, you can determine what the business impact is of that decision. And people will almost invariably act in the best possible manner when they say, oops, that $20,000 decision I was making is actually going to turn out to be a $200,000 cost because of some impact. There's some other orders that are going to be delayed. There's expediting costs that are going to be increased. There's capacity that's going to be overflowing. So once they understand that context, they will make the best decision for the company. But it is about getting the information out into the hands of the people actually operating the supply chain rather than bringing it up into a central location. The control tower is about having that information available for the rest of the organization to have the visibility as to what's going on.
So let me pick up on that point, because I think there's a couple of important items that we've raised here. One is this is a decoupling from the transaction layer. It doesn't replace the transaction layer. Second of all, it's a process model with information and context, and this is your business operating system. Let's talk about the analytics capabilities, all right? Yeah. So I'm going to still do some analytics in my ERP or my CRM system, but I might choose to do other process analytics up in my control tower. Can you talk a little bit about some examples of that so we get a feeling for the analytical capabilities in the control tower?
Yes, so most certainly, the key thing is trying to connect the different dots in your supply chain. If you've got a factory where you're making API in the pharmaceutical industry, process-driven, very expensive changeover periods, etc., you probably need a different system to be able to do that. If you're doing detailed sequencing and scheduling of final assembly of manufacturing, you might need a different system for that. But it's not about what happens in a single factory, on a single production line, in a particular tank. It's about connecting that information together so that when you know if you're going to change the shift patterns in a certain line, how does that impact your inventory? How does it impact your customer satisfaction? That is the important bit about a control tower, is being able to do that level of analytics. Now, it depends on the industry you're in. A lot of our customers are in high-tech electronics with fairly deep bills of material, highly changeable, and interchangeable parts, semiconductors with different speed binning requirements, etc. When you're making a decision in the medium term, you need to be able to navigate through that bill of material to understand what are the constituent capacities and component requirements that you have through that bill of material. But you don't need to know that you're going to make it at 10:05 on Saturday morning or whenever it is. You just need to know that it's going to be available on a certain day. And that's sufficient to get the end-to-end.
You know what, the point, an example of 2 points that come to mind for me is at a process excellence conference, there was the head of a big pharmaceutical company, and she said, I went into the blueprinting process of the big ERP system, and when I looked at the way they were blueprinting, I said, well, we don't run the business like that, no, but the system makes us run the process that way. And the other comment she made was, you realize that one transaction takes 9 departments to be successful. So to the point, going back to the point of the ERP system, what this allows us to do is to connect our information process environment much more tightly with the way the business actually operates.
Absolutely.
And I think we've worked around that in the past, and we've caused a lot of complexity in the business.
Yes. Many of our customers come to us because they have multiple instances of ERP, but that's not how the business is run.
Right.
Because the business crosses those ERP systems, and being able to get the information to flow. And I mean, everybody can get the information to flow in the sense that they issue EDI messages overnight and they bring it into the other system overnight, and then they run an MRP, run that next day, and then they ship it overnight to the next system, etc. Everybody can connect to that level. But I don't know of any business that can operate at that speed today.
And it's unmanageable. Bull, anything you want to add to this?
I've lost my microphone.
Well, we're hearing you loud and clear.
But we probably have time for 2 more questions.
Right. Yeah. So I think what we're going to do is let's ask one more question, and then if there isn't another question, we're going to ask each of the panel members just to sum up with that closing point, and let's make sure that that's what we associate each one of us with. So any
more question, going once, going twice. Oh, there's a follow-up to the...
But anyway, I think your answer about the control tower convinced me wherever you can leverage within your organization. And so that's a good answer. Now, follow-up to that question is, when you started talking about building this intermediate layer that help us, a company actually evolving and evolving the processes so that you can grow from stage 1 to stage 5. Yeah. My question goes back to Martin is, what kind of companies will benefit the most having this layer built up? If I'm saying that I'm at stage 1 without having any kind of systems that you indicated over there, MES or SEM or SRM, whatever, I don't have that today. Is that something we should think about now, or actually build those fundamentals before I even think about the middle layer?
I love that question. So I'm going to give you an answer for stage 1, and I'm going to give you an answer for stage 2. So stage 1, when I'm reacting to problems in the business, if I have a whole lot of silos of systems, there's a real risk that my reactions are discoordinated and I cause a lot of issues in the business. Stage 2, where I'm building projects around continuous improvement opportunities, the big challenge that companies have is that I may have 6 projects. Let's say I'm launching a project, a new product, I'm optimizing inventory, I'm reducing costs, I may be implementing a new system. It's very difficult to, in an integrative way, synchronize those projects so that I'm always driving and fixing the lowest common denominator that's holding me back. Well, how do I fix that in a control tower environment? I'm seeing all the performance of those projects in one 360-degree environment. I know what's holding me back as long as I'm looking at the right measures. I might not be doing well in S&OP simply because of teamwork or collaboration processes. What this allows me to see is, where is that lowest common denominator? Anything that any of you would add to that?
Well, it's something I'd like to pick up, because often what I hear is people ask about data nirvana. Do we have enough data? Do we have the right data? Don't we need to go through a process of cleaning our data? Folks, you're running your supply chains with that data right now, and you're running it in an isolated fashion. By bringing it up into a control tower where you can at least use that data to do some end-to-end analysis, there's no doubt about it. The analysis you do, if you increase the quality and quantity of your data, is going to improve. But you get an incremental improvement. In fact, you get a step change in improvement simply by being able to understand what you're doing across your supply chain with the data that you've got.
So I'd like to add something to that, and I'd like Bob's comment here, because I think what it does is, I mean, there was always this question, we know master data is absolutely critical to this transaction processing layer. But where this really puts some priority on the companies to standardize processes and start thinking about what processes look like, what the outcomes of processes are. And so the effort of master and standards management actually goes to a more business relevant level. I mean, is that a fair comment?
Oh, absolutely. You start looking at the relevance of the data to the specific processes. So you start building your governance for data around those processes.
processes drive outcomes in the business. And so therefore we've got to get to a place where we can actually manage those outcomes.
Roddy, I think we have time to do the wrap-up.
Okay, let's go.
So you can
and then
go
you're going to
first.
throw me off the stage?
No, you can throw me off, so I'll turn it back to you.
Bob, so I asked each of the panel members as we close out just to leave one key thought, based on the discussions we've had. Maybe it's just an extension of what you said at the beginning. But,
well, I think just to continue on what I started with the beginning here is I think we need flexible, scalable, actionable applications. And I think this is what the control tower brings to us. It brings the ability for us in our supply chain to have that flexibility, that scalability as our business changes, as we couple and decouple businesses, as we couple and decouple brands, that we've got that scalability, we've got that flexibility, and most importantly, we've got actionability.
Good points.
Yeah, and mine is still around intelligent speed. We live in an environment now where, my point about not having S&OP on a monthly basis. We've got to be able to make decisions quickly, and they need to be good, informed decisions. The whole trade-off between someone thinking that we're going to increase, profit by a certain amount, but not understanding the cost implications, and being able to answer that particular C-level position in a matter of minutes, not in a matter of days or weeks. By the time the decision's made, it's too late.
So it's fully informed 360 contextual process decisions.
Exactly.
I think it's a very good point.
And I started by visibility is not enough, that you need actionable insight. Well, I go further and say that planning is not enough. And this is a key thing that Shellie was talking about, right? So, yes, you plan, but you have to understand how that plan is going awry, and you need to be able to respond profitably or intelligently, as Shellie's saying, very, very quickly. And S&OP, we only designed S&OP as the stage process because we didn't have the tools and capabilities to bring people together. But, just in the term, sales and operations means that you bring in two organizations together in a cross-functional process. And all the control tower is extending that concept to bring in engineering or procurement or whomever else so that Shellie can have a daily S&OP cadence. Continuous S&OP. Okay? So just if I put it into a pithy statement, it's no sooner, act faster. Okay?
I think my point, and then Bill, you can
Actually,
close
Roddy,
out.
what I was going to say, I think you should have the last word on control tower, and I wanted to understand, or what your thought is. Control tower, is it another buzzword, or should we expect to be getting RFIs and RFPs asking for control tower?
Well, I think we've got to be careful of that. I mean, us as analysts, my analyst days, the buzzwords come up, and I think they end up by being very confusing. I mean, I know one big consumer goods company who doesn't want to call integrated business planning because there's going to be a flood of consultants selling integrated business planning. So I think we've got to be very careful. I think it's up to us to make sure the concepts are clear and that the value proposition is defined. And I think my value proposition that I will close out with is to say the reality is we're driving for an end-to-end supply chain capability with the outcome that we profitably respond to changes in the marketplace. That's why we're all here. The problem is all the enablers that we've put in place have caused so much complexity that we can't react fast and efficiently and intelligently. And so we're holding the business back in this progression of end-to-end supply chain because of all this IT stuff that we've put in place. So I think that decoupling layer that is process context with information is absolutely the only way to go. I don't know how else you do this.
Well, we're just about out of time, and I have to say, if you've ever seen a late supply chain show, this is by far the most credible show we've ever had. So I would really like to thank our panelists, Trevor, Shellie, and Bob. Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
I'd especially like to thank Roddy. I think I just lost the job. You did a great job. We really appreciate the dialogue. Thank you for the questions, and for the folks that we didn't get to answer the questions, I would encourage you to grab any of our panelists to continue the control tower dialogue, or come by the Kinaxis booth. We'd be more than happy to continue the discussion. Don't forget, too, that there are shirts at the back. please feel free to take one. They make great re-gifts, and they're also great painting shirts. So help yourself with that. And thanks for being here, and enjoy the rest of the show.